We're starting in verse 20. We'll go ahead and read through verse 27. We are talking about a spiritual wellness exam. I love my doctor. Once upon a time, did you catch that? Once upon a time, I went to my doctor and he weighed me and checked my height and pulled out the height and weight chart. And he said, I have good news for you. He said, you are not overweight. Regardless of what anybody tells you, you are not overweight. According to this chart, you're just under tall. So I appreciate my doctor. I love him tall. When I get up a few more inches, I will be in perfect. We're talking about a spiritual wellness exam, having a spiritual physical. A couple of weeks ago, we started with verse 20. My son, pay attention to what I say. Turn your ear to my words. We talked about your spiritual hearing. Don't let them out of your sight. Keep them within your heart, for they are life to those who find them and health to one's whole body. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Keep your mouth free of perversity. Keep corrupt talk far from your lips. Let your eyes look straight ahead. Fix your gaze directly before you. Give careful thought to the paths for your feet, and be steadfast in all your ways. Do not turn to the right or the left. Keep your foot from evil. So you can see the different things there that he's talking about that we're going to be examining over these next few weeks as Solomon gives us a spiritual physical. Last week, we were beginning verse 23. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. The Hebrew language is interesting in that the most important thing in the sentence comes first. And so when Solomon says, above all else, guard your heart, it's like he's underlining it and circling it and highlighting it and putting it in bold print and saying, this is important. Above everything else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Mark DeHaan, in an article that he wrote in Our Daily Bread, and the new ones are on the back table if you haven't gotten yours yet, writes this: if you're over 40 years old, your heart has already beat more than 1.5 billion times. I know that when my heart stops, it will be too late to change my ways. So I've been trying to control my weight, get exercise, watch not only what I eat, but what's eating me. And this last point relates to another vital organ called the heart, our spiritual heart. It too has throbbed millions of times with thoughts, affections, and choices. In the heart, we determine how we'll speak, behave, and respond to life's circumstances. Will we trust the Lord and choose to be gracious and patient and loving, or will we yield to pride and greed and bitterness? Proverbs 4:23 emphasizes the importance of caring for our heart. Are we keeping spiritually fit? Weight. Do we need to lose the weight of unnecessary burdens and cares? Pulse. Are we maintaining a steady rhythm of gratitude and praise? Blood pressure. Is our trust greater than our anxiety? Diet. Are we enjoying the life-giving nutrients of the Word of God? Have you checked your heart lately? Well, remember that we've been talking about heart, and this word is used over 90 times in the book of Proverbs. And remember what we said at the very beginning of this study. When we study the Old Testament, we're not going to look at what the English words mean. We're going to look at what the Hebrew words that Solomon wrote mean. And this Hebrew word translated heart means your mind, your will, and your emotions. And he says, above everything that you do, make sure you guard your heart. Last week, we talked about guarding your mind. And we talked about thought processes and how to control your thinking. Today, we're going to look at the will, how you make decisions. The Bible term for that is self-control. And then next week, the plan is to look at how to control your emotions. Above everything you do, he says, guard, protect your heart, because everything flows from your heart. The King James says, from it are the issues of life. It means the source and direction of your life comes from your heart. It's the verse that Solomon gives us later in Proverbs 23, verse 7. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Or the old timers who paraphrased it, what's down in the well will come up in the bucket. It's your heart. From your heart, everything else flows. The direction of your life, the condition of your life, all comes from your heart. And when you stop and think about it, that's true. Your mind, how you think, how you let yourself think. Your will, how you control yourself, how you make decisions. Your emotions, how do you react to things. You look back over your life, and when you've gotten in trouble, it's because one of those three parts of your heart wasn't working right. Either your thinking process was stinking, or your will was all over the place, or your emotions were all over the place, and you ended up in trouble. And so Solomon says, you need to slow down and do a cardiac exam and see how your spiritual heart is. So last week we talked about your mind, your thinking. Today we're going to talk about your will, how you make decisions. Again, the Bible term for that is self-control, making the right decisions because you're under control. Proverbs 25 verse 28, Solomon says, like a city whose walls are broken down is a person who lacks self-control. In Solomon's day, the city was surrounded by a wall, which was its first line of protection. When that wall was broken down, basically the city was defenseless. Solomon says, if your self-control is broken down, if you can't control yourself, if you can't make your heart be obedient to do what's right, you're going to be in trouble. There was a fascinating study that was done decades ago at Columbia University about the importance of self-control. And, a lot of times you read about a study, and it only happened a year or two ago, so you really can't tell whether it was any good or not. But over 30 years ago, they did this study at Columbia University, and then they tracked the young people that were involved in the study for 30 years, and so they could see how what they did as a child impacted how they lived as an adult. And what they did was they brought these children into a room. They were 4-year-olds. And they said to these 4-year-olds, if you can wait 10 minutes till the teacher comes back, we will give each of you 5 pieces of candy. If you ring this bell before the teacher comes back, we will give you 2 pieces of candy. But if you can wait for 10 minutes, we'll give you 5 pieces of candy. The people that then watched those 4-year-olds said, you could tell this was torture. They were squirming. Some of them kind of kept their hand over the bell, and just trying to. They said you could see some of them doing the math. Oh yeah, 5 is a lot more than 2, and several of them actually made it the full 10 minutes. But what was interesting is then they studied those 4-year-olds for the next 30 years. And they found that the students who passed that test, waited for the 10 minutes, did better as adults. Their SAT scores were higher. The guys had fewer run-ins with the law. The girls were less likely to get pregnant out of wedlock. And the doctor who ran this exam basically said, if we're concerned about raising children to be successful, don't worry so much about self-esteem, concentrate on self-control. And you stop and realize that we are living in a world that has said you don't have to worry about it anymore. Those of us who are older, we were trained, hold it in. This new generation is told, let it go. And we're seeing what happens in a society when everybody just runs wild without any self-control, without guarding their will. How you make decisions. Now, I'm going to give you some steps on how to develop self-control because we do have a part to play in that. However, as we stay connected with Christ, the fruit of the Spirit is self-control. And so the good news for us who are believers is that we don't have to, make those intense faces and grunt and groan trying to develop self-control. if we will stay connected to Christ and follow the disciplines we're going to talk about this morning, the fruit of the Spirit is going to be that self-control. It's Galatians 2:20. I am crucified with Christ, but yet I live, but not as me anymore. The life I live now, I live by faith in the Son of God. But since Solomon says, guard your heart, above everything else you do, guard your heart, we have some responsibility in developing and guarding our will, our self-control. It begins with accepting responsibility for it. You ever met anybody that never took responsibility for their decisions? They always blamed somebody else. And because they did not have any control over their will, they didn't have any self-control. And so they started blaming other people. You just know how people from this part of the country are, and you know how that heritage is, and I'm redheaded and I can't help it, or, I was the firstborn or the middleborn or the lastborn, or whatever the order was that gives me some excuse for not guarding my will. You've got to accept responsibility to it. I love the quote from Jack Parr. He said, looking back, my life seems to be one long obstacle course with me as the chief obstacle. And when we get real and honest, we have to say, yeah. In fact, I was talking to an administrator the other day, and they said, you can only blame the last people for so long. After a while, you have to take responsibility for what's going on in your business. So, yeah. So what's our responsibility? Well, you're responsible for who you are, because you are the sum total of the decisions that you made. There are some of us that maybe had a little rougher start, but ultimately, as adults, we're responsible for the decisions that we made, and we need to take responsibility for who we are and stop blaming somebody else for that. You're responsible for what you can do. You have potential, and tying in with that, you're responsible for what you've received. God has given you abilities and talents and skills, and you're responsible for what you've received. In fact, the Scripture says we're going to give an account one day for what we did with what God gave us. And so that ties in with being responsible for what we can do, living up to our potential, doing what God has called us to do. But if we're going to be able to get our will under control, we have to accept God's forgiveness for our past. Philippians chapter 3, Paul says, one thing I do, I forget what's behind, and I press toward what's ahead. We all know how the devil works, and how some of his co-workers, not all demons are spiritual people, right? Not all demons are spirits. You probably know some demons, that are in human form. Some of Satan's co-workers, anytime you try to turn a new leaf, anytime you try to do something better, there's always somebody around to say, I remember when you tried that the last 5 times and it didn't work then. How do you think it's going to work this time, right? And so what happens is, if you have not accepted God's forgiveness for your past, anytime you try to do better in the area of my will and my self-control, you're going to think, why should I bother? I can't do it anyway. I've proven I can't do it anyway, so why should I bother? So it's critical that we accept God's forgiveness. It's critical that we know that He has given us a fresh start. As somebody said, if you missed God's plan A, He has a big alphabet. And He does. And if we can understand His mercy, I was talking to a guy the other day at work, and he said, Chaplain, God told me something yesterday morning that has changed my life. And I don't know if you've been reading through Lamentations or what, but there's that great verse in Lamentations that says, it is of God's mercies that we are not consumed. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. That's where that great hymn comes from. And he said, what hit me is God said to me, my mercies for you are new every morning. I said, I heard somebody say that the reason God's mercies are new for us every morning is because He ran out of them yesterday, being merciful to us so much. Aren't you glad God never runs out of mercy? And His mercy for you started all over fresh this morning. And that's good news. We've got to learn to accept that. That God is a God of grace. God is a God of mercy. And if we can do that, and we can put the past behind us, and thank God for the courage to make a new start, then we will be well on the way to developing our will and developing a self-control that brings glory to God, because we're no longer allowing the devil to beat us up over what we messed up the last time. You remember the TV show Coach? Luther, not Luther, the other fellow, anyway, Jerry Van Dyke, his character, was so great. He came into the office one day and he said, Coach, I have made a decision. Today is the first day of the rest of my life. And this time, I mean it. Well, God said, good. This time you mean it. That's okay. One of these times it's going to take, right? His mercies are new every morning. Accept God's forgiveness for your past. Then talk to yourself. Some will say, oh, good. I'm not crazy after all. The Bible says talk to yourself. The book of Titus, chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. The grace of God has appeared to us, teaching us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly in this present age. Guard your heart. Guard your will. Learn to say no. Talk to yourself. And instead of saying no, you say, yes, I can. With God's help, yes, I can. You've got to believe that you can change. The times in the past that your will has failed, you have got to believe that you can change. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Yes, I can with God's help. I went over this with you last week. My guess is I will go over it again with you next week, because it is so important. I give credit again, once again, to Victoria for bringing it to me from her studies. Cognitive behavioral therapy goes beyond what you do to why you do it. And part of cognitive behavioral therapy is this 3-point process. Catch it, check it, change it. And this helps, and she was talking about in her field of study, how it helps in so many different areas as people are trying to break free from destructive behaviors that begin with destructive thought processes. We talked about that last week. Catch it, check it, change it. Because guarding your will starts with guarding your mind. That's, again, the heart, your mind, your will, and your emotions. They are so interrelated. You know that if you think wrong thoughts, you're going to make bad decisions with your will. You know that if you allow your emotions to control you, you're going to make bad decisions with your will. And so this process, and the reason I'm going to go over it 3 weeks in a row, is because I want you to catch it. Catch it, check it, change it. And as I've been mulling on this over the last couple of weeks, it is an incredibly biblically based process. Catch it. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. Catch it. Bring it into obedience to Christ. As you are trying to make the right decision with your will, as you're trying to develop your self-control, there are going to be thoughts bombarding you about why it's going to be easier to take the less biblical way out, why it's going to be easier to give into the flesh instead of living by the Spirit, why it's going to be easier to give into those moods instead of being more than a conqueror. You're going to be bombarded with those thoughts. You've got to catch them. You've got to be aware of what's happening. Again, we said you can't stop the thoughts from flying over your hair, but you can stop them from building a nest in your head. Stop them. Catch it. Check it. Wait a minute. What am I thinking? And last week we gave you the filters through which to check it from Philippians 4:8. Is this true? Because so many times when you're struggling with your will, the devil gives you things like, it really won't make any difference this one time. Or you can get, nobody's looking. Nobody will ever know. It's the way to get ahead. It's how you're going to keep your job. And all of those thought processes come in your mind. And anyway, God really doesn't care. And that stuff in the Bible, he was just talking. He doesn't really care about that. And God's not looking right now anyway, because it's dark. No. Is this true? Is it noble? Is it right? Is it pure? Does it promote love? Is it admirable? Is it worthy of praise? Is it motivating me to live for God? Check it. This thought process that I'm allowing to go through in my mind that's going to impact my will, I need to check it according to these biblical guidelines. And then change it. You substitute the negative, ungodly thought process for something that is godly and positive. And that's Ephesians 4, verses 22 through 24. You were taught, with regard to your former way of life, to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, there's the mind again, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in righteousness and holiness. That's changing it. Putting off the old way, putting on the new way. So if you're going to develop your will, if you're going to learn to make right decisions, if you're going to do what Solomon says in this physical he's giving our spirits, guard your heart, your mind, your will, your emotions. Believe that you can change. Believe that the bad decisions in your life aren't going to define you from this day forward. Believe that those mistakes from the past, because of your lack of self-control, are not going to continue to hold you back from doing what God has called you to do, because His mercies are new every morning. Believe you can change, and then it helps to be accountable. Ecclesiastes 4:12 says, one may be overpowered, but two can defend themselves. And in whatever good things you're trying to develop in your life, it helps to have accountability. If somebody's going to meet you at the gym, you tend to make sure you're there a little better than if it's just you. So be accountable and stay away from temptation. Ephesians 4:27, don't give the devil a foothold. Here's the Wilson paraphrase of that verse. Don't be stupid. Stay away from temptation. Don't try to prove how strong your will is by putting temptation all around you. That's just being stupid. That's giving the devil a foothold. Had a good example of this the other day. One of my jobs, I heard somebody say the other day that the secret to always having an income is having more than two, and I counted how many different places I work. I think I'm covered. But in one of my jobs the other day, we've been having a very, very difficult couple of weeks, very challenging on all kinds of different levels. And everybody's just on edge. And in the morning meeting that morning, the kitchen manager said, I'm making cookies for everybody today. When do you want me to get them out? I think I can have them ready about 2. I said, yeah, cookies for the whole staff, everybody. And now she figured out how many she needed to make. And I was sitting in one of the offices when she came around with the freshly baked cookies. And she set them down, and one of the ladies in the office got one and then picked up the tray and said, I'm taking these someplace else. Because my diet philosophy is out of sight, out of mind. Smart lady, right? Don't be stupid. Make sure that you stay away from temptation because you're trying to develop your will. And you develop your will by focusing on the good, not trying to prove how strong you are against the evil. And then depend on God's Spirit. I started our time together saying, this is not something we have to do by ourselves. We do have responsibilities. But Galatians 5:16 says, if you will live by the Spirit, you won't gratify the desires of the sinful nature. It's important for us to understand that we can depend on God's Spirit. Philippians chapter 2, verse 13 is a great verse. The Living Bible paraphrases it like this. God is at work within you, helping you to want to obey Him, and then helping you to do what He wants. Depend on His Spirit. Because the secret of self-control is Christ control. The secret of guarding our will is, there's an old hymn, if you grew up in church you may have sung it or heard it. It's called Draw Me Nearer. And there's a line in the song that says, may my soul look up with a steadfast hope, and my will be lost in thine. See, the secret of guarding our will is that prayer that we studied last year in the Lord's Prayer. Not my will, thine be done. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done. Depend on God's Spirit. All right, so I need to develop self-control. I need to strengthen my will. I need to guard my will. How do I do it? Well, start early. I know it's too late for some of you. You think, no, it's not. Don't start tomorrow. Start today. Isn't it amazing how every diet starts tomorrow? Every good habit starts tomorrow. No. Start early. There's an old saying, pay now, play later, or play now and pay later. You remember college and people that studied all semester long, and when it came time for the finals, they really didn't have to do a whole lot of studying because they'd been paying the price. And they were out playing finals week. And then the people that waited to the last day to cram because they've been playing the whole time, usually ended up paying. And usually when you pay later, the price is much higher. Start early. Don't put it off any longer. Start small. You develop self-control. You develop your will to be able to face big things by being victorious in the little things. Here's a great spiritual truth. How do you need an elephant? One bite at a time, right? You start small with things like the alarm clock, with being on time someplace. Just start small with the little things that you can control, because as you build successes, then you're going to be more self-controlled in the larger things. And so start strategically. You've probably been thinking through this time, and if you haven't, talk to the person sitting next to you. They've probably been thinking about what you need to do to develop self-control. Think about your weakest areas. Where are some areas in my life that are really hurting me? Which one is hurting me the most? If I could just get control over this, my life would be better. And then work on that area consistently. Feel like getting an accountability partner in that area. I'm trying to work on this. Will you help me? I've told you before, I heard a leader of a Christian organization say that he was working on developing that discipline of every day spending time with God. And he said, I have given every single person that works for me the right to stop me anytime, any day, and ask me, what did God say to you this morning in your quiet time? Now that's accountability. Then chart your progress. Kind of keep track. How am I doing? And build and focus on the wins. The devil will try to get you to focus on the losses, the times that you blew it. Don't do that. Remember, accept God's forgiveness. Focus on the wins. What do you know? I made it an hour, without losing my temper, or whatever the area is that you're trying to work on with your will and your self-control. And start now. John Hancock Field says, all worthwhile people have good thoughts and good ideas and good intentions, but very few of them ever translate them into action. Start now. Today is the start of what you can be with God's help. Solomon says, above everything else you do, guard your heart, because everything you do flows from it. Pay attention to what you're thinking. That sermon should be online in the next couple of days if you weren't here last week. Develop your will. Guard your will. Develop your self-control. Make the decisions that are right. And then next week we're going to talk about how to keep your emotions under control, because that's the third part of our heart. And if we're going to be spiritually strong-hearted people, we need to guard our minds, our wills, our emotions. So there's your assignment. What do you need to change the most? What area of your self-control will help you the most if you get it under God's control? And live close to Him, stay focused on Him. And when those thoughts from the devil come, say it with me, catch it, check it, change it. Let's pray. Thank you, Father, that you are on our side. That you're not up in heaven just laughing at us when we mess up or beating us up when we mess up. You're in heaven loving us with an unlimited supply of grace and mercy and forgiveness. And Lord, some of us maybe in this room have almost even given up because we feel like we've messed up so much. I pray that if there's someone here like that, that we will leave this place with a new confidence that God is with me and I can with God's help. For those of us, Lord, who are endeavoring to keep a watch over our mind and our thoughts, help us to stay focused on you and the things that are true. Because as we focus on the things that are true, then we know that we are not failures. We are made in the image of God, and you love us, and you're on our side, and we can be more than conquerors through Christ. So, Lord, as we leave this place, may we leave with a spring in our step because we've been in your presence. May we leave with the joy of the Lord as our strength. And may we leave with your presence flowing through us and out from us to touch the lives of those we come in contact with today. So many people, Lord, that we will meet through our day and through our week desperately need somebody to give them a smile, to give them an encouraging word, to allow the beauty of Jesus to flow through us to touch their lives. May we be those kind of people, Lord, here in this world. And now may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine on you and give you his peace now and evermore. Amen. God bless you. Thanks for coming out today. You're dismissed.